In ancient Egypt, the heart was seen as the seat of the soul. The brain, by contrast, was treated as biological waste. During mummification, organs were carefully removed, embalmed, and stored in sacred jars. The brain, however, was discarded without honor. A hook was inserted through the nose, the brain was liquefied and thrown away. No spiritual or vital function was attributed to it. This belief wasn't unique to the Egyptians. In foundational religious texts like the Old and New Testaments, the brain is never mentioned. Emotions, willpower, spiritual identity, and consciousness were all linked to the heart. Even Aristotle, whose ideas shaped Western philosophy, believed that the brain existed merely to cool the blood produced by the heart, which he saw as the true engine of life. Even in the centuries that followed, this heart-centered worldview shaped art, medicine, and religion. Physicians spoke of passion as heat and reason as coldness, while poets linked emotion to the pulse. The brain remained a silent organ, hidden in shadow, its importance recognized only by a few daring minds who questioned what truly gives rise to awareness. Hippocrates was one of the first to challenge this view. He proposed that everything we experience, pain, pleasure, thought, fear, originates in the brain. This idea was later expanded by Galen, a Roman physician and anatomist, who connected brain injuries to changes in behavior. Yet their insights were overshadowed by a long-standing tradition that denied the brain its rightful central role. A major conceptual shift began with the work of Thomas Willis. In his book Cerebri Anatomy, published in 1664, he not only mapped the brain's anatomy in detail, but also introduced a term that would spark an entirely new discipline: neurology. His approach was methodical, almost revolutionary, and marked the point at which science began to firmly accept that consciousness had a physical basis. At the same time, Robert Hooke, using a crude but powerful microscope, made a discovery that would transform our understanding of life. He observed tiny structures in a thin slice of cork and named them cells. From that moment, the human body was no longer seen as a solid mass, but as a community of living, autonomous units. This discovery ignited an intellectual revolution. Scientists began to suspect that complexity itself might hold the secret of life. That organization, not divine spark, gave matter its vitality. For the first time, the body was viewed not merely as a vessel for spirit, but as a network of living machinery, where each cell played a small but indispensable part in sustaining thought and feeling. Today, we know the body contains around 30 trillion cells, a vast cellular society in which less than 1% belongs to the central nervous system. Yet this tiny portion governs all mental and conscious functions. The shift from a mechanical model to one that is cellular and electrical unfolded gradually. Scientists discovered that neurons communicate through electrical impulses, and that this organized activity shapes what we feel, think, and perceive. The brain structure turned out to be deeply specialized, with neurons as diverse as they are beautiful. Santiago Ramón y Cajal, the great Spanish neuroscientist, captured this diversity in his drawings: pyramidal, spine-like, stellate, Purkinje cells, and many others. Some resemble trees, others coral reefs, all connected in a microscopic dance that builds conscious experience. Christof Koch highlights the paradox of this structure: a small 1.5 kilo organ enclosed in the darkness of the skull, capable of generating an entire subjective universe. But there's a nuance that opens the door to mystery. Not all regions of the brain take part in this phenomenon. There are areas, even large ones, that can be active without producing any consciousness at all. This is where the true enigma begins. Consciousness does not spread evenly throughout the brain, much less the body. Understanding why some regions generate awareness, while others do not, is the first step towards the heart of one of existence's greatest mysteries. One of the most common misconceptions about consciousness is the belief that all brain activity equates to subjective experience, that if the body breathes, the heart beats, or the digestive system functions, then there must be someone in there feeling it all. Christof Koch insists this intuition is false. Simply being alive does not mean one is conscious. Within the brain, there are structures absolutely essential for keeping us alive, yet they appear to have no direct connection to what we think or feel. One of these is the brainstem, a deep-seated region responsible for vital functions like breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, and basic levels of alertness. If this area is severely damaged, the body may cease to function altogether. And yet, its proper function does not guarantee the presence of consciousness. Koch points out that these basic processes are necessary, but not sufficient. They may keep the body running, but that doesn't ensure there's a mind behind the eyes. Consciousness, he argues, resides elsewhere, and not all brain activity leads to its emergence. This distinction between physiological activity and subjective experience is key to understanding the mystery of consciousness. Koch often reminds us that the brain is not a uniform landscape, but a collection of specialized regions, each performing its own silent duties. Much of what happens within us is invisible to awareness, a vast machinery humming beneath the surface. Breathing, heartbeat, digestion, the subtle adjustments of muscles and glands, all unfold without a single flicker of consciousness. This realization unsettles our intuition because it reveals that awareness is not woven into every fiber of life, but emerges only in specific networks. The brain, in this sense, is like a great orchestra. Most instruments play beneath the threshold of hearing, while only a few melodies rise into the bright stage of awareness. A more puzzling case is the cerebellum. This structure occupies just a small portion of the brain's volume, yet it houses over 80% of its neurons. It's responsible for fine motor coordination, balance, and posture. Its architecture is highly regular, a network of precise repeating circuits. And yet, when it's damaged, even severely, consciousness remains intact. There are no hallucinations, no mental blackouts, no altered states. The person simply loses control over physical coordination. This defies all expectation. Koch considers it one of neuroscience's great riddles. How can the brain's most neuron-dense region play no role in shaping conscious experience? A striking example is Yu, a Chinese woman who arrived at a hospital with dizziness and trouble walking. A scan revealed she had no cerebellum. Her skull was empty in that region. Yet she could speak, understand, remember, and respond coherently. Her childhood was marked by delayed speech and motor skills, but her brain adapted. Koch cites her case as a remarkable example of brain plasticity and of consciousness persisting without structures once thought essential. Researchers like Lemon and Edgley have studied other individuals with damaged or absent cerebellums, and they agree. Consciousness remains intact, even when motor function is impaired. This strongly suggests that the cerebellum is not part of the conscious core of the human brain. These findings reinforce a central idea. Not all neural activity is conscious. Some areas of the brain, even highly active or life-sustaining ones, contribute nothing to our felt experience. Just because a function is necessary does not mean it's sufficient for consciousness. This principle, Koch stresses, is crucial to mapping the true contours of the conscious mind. Understanding this distinction is vital. It brings us closer to a more accurate picture of the brain and dismantles the myth that everything alive must be aware, because it's not enough to be lit up inside. Consciousness demands something more. Consciousness is not a side effect of brain activity, nor is it an illusion or a metaphor. It is a real phenomenon with a specific physical correlate in the brain. Christof Koch defines it precisely. The neural correlates of consciousness are the minimal brain mechanisms that, when active, produce a conscious experience, and when deactivated, cause that experience to vanish. Identifying these correlates means separating the essential from the incidental. It is not enough to observe which parts of the brain are active. It is necessary to prove that their activation alone is sufficient to generate experience, without the involvement of auxiliary areas. Koch and neuroscientist Tommaso Poggio formulated this methodological framework to study consciousness as an objective, measurable phenomenon, just as Francis Crick proposed when he shifted from genetics to explore the mind. Crick, renowned for discovering the structure of DNA alongside James Watson, devoted his later years to what he saw as biology's greatest challenge: understanding how the brain creates subjective experience. His direct, uncompromising approach deeply influenced Koch, who took on the same challenge with scientific rigor. Another important factor that researchers consider is the concept of minimal sufficiency. For a brain region to be identified as part of the neural correlate of consciousness, it must be the smallest unit whose activity alone is enough to give rise to experience. This is a demanding criterion. It excludes any region that merely supports, amplifies, or transmits signals without directly generating subjective awareness. To strengthen this approach, scientists have also studied patients with brain injuries or those who undergo surgical resections. When specific areas are removed and consciousness remains unchanged, those regions can be ruled out as essential. This process of elimination helps narrow down the true neural origins of conscious experience. Functional imaging techniques like fMRI and PET scans have further refined the map. They allow researchers to observe which regions light up during specific perceptual or emotional states. However, these tools alone cannot establish causation, which is why stimulation and lesion studies are crucial. These insights show that consciousness is not evenly distributed across the brain. Instead, it is a localized and finely tuned process. Only specific circuits, when precisely engaged, allow for the vivid inner movie we call experience to unfold. One of the earliest candidates for a neural correlate of consciousness was synchronized brain activity in the 40 Hz frequency range. These oscillations appeared when people reported conscious experiences, especially visual ones. But researchers soon realized that the same signals occurred even when the stimulus was not consciously perceived. So correlation did not mean causation. The real challenge was to find brain events that were sufficient by themselves to produce experience. To tackle this, neuroscientists turned to a bold but illuminating method: implanting electrodes directly into the brains of awake patients. This is done during surgeries for treatment-resistant epilepsy, where surgeons must identify which areas can be safely removed. Neurosurgeon Itzhak Fried, working with conscious patients in these surgeries, discovered that stimulating specific regions could trigger intense experiences. Some patients heard voices, others saw vivid images or felt overwhelming emotions. Consciousness could be activated with surgical precision. One striking case was documented by researcher Parvizi. When he stimulated the insula, a woman suddenly felt an intense wave of guilt and burst into tears. There was no memory or thought behind it, just pure emotion, activated by a specific neural circuit. In another session, the same woman believed her mother was shouting at her. Koch sees these responses as proof that the brain can produce full-blown emotions and visions without external stimuli. These induced experiences, paradoxically, echo Sigmund Freud's ideas that the mind contains deep layers of emotion, trauma, and desire beyond conscious reach. Koch admits that, in many ways, Freud was right. Emotions are not only stored in the brain, they can be summoned directly if the right circuit is activated. These experiments not only pinpoint the functional architecture of consciousness, they also give scientists a powerful tool to decode it. The mind is not some untouchable mystery. It has electrical, chemical, and spatial foundations. Consciousness arises when certain structures are activated precisely, not by chance or general brain activity. For Koch, each of these revelations brings science closer to a theory of consciousness grounded in biology, not abstract philosophy. And while the map is still incomplete, its outline is visible, a complex, mysterious, deeply human network that reveals, with every electric pulse, who we truly are. When Christof Koch first embarked on the study of consciousness through neuroscience, he knew the path ahead would be anything but easy. He stepped into a domain long dominated by philosophy, dense with speculation, paradoxes, and unresolved debates. One figure in particular stood out in that space: David Chalmers, the charismatic Australian philosopher who brought the hard problem of consciousness into the scientific mainstream. For Chalmers, consciousness cannot be fully explained by studying the brain alone. No matter how deeply we understand neural mechanisms, connections, or electrical impulses, we still face a core mystery. Why does a particular brain state feel like something? Why does seeing red feel like red? Why does pain actually hurt? He argues that these subjective qualities, what philosophers call qualia, cannot be reduced to physical processes. Instead, he proposes that consciousness is a fundamental feature of the universe, as basic as space, time, or mass. Koch disagrees. He insists that consciousness is a physical phenomenon, that it emerges from specific structures operating under specific conditions, and that it can, therefore, be mapped, measured, and ultimately understood. He acknowledges its complexity, but not its supposed mystery. Koch often draws a comparison with life itself. For centuries, it appeared miraculous, unexplainable, until the discovery of DNA illuminated its structure and mechanisms. He believes consciousness is similarly grounded in the physical world, waiting to be decoded. The tension between these two worldviews came to a head at scientific conferences where Koch and Chalmers often crossed paths. During one of these events, they famously made a bet. Koch, in his characteristically direct manner, challenged Chalmers, "If we don't find the neural correlates of consciousness in the next 25 years, I'll leave science." Chalmers, with his usual wit, replied, "I won't leave philosophy, but I'd love to see if you follow through." The bet wasn't formal nor legally binding, but it captured the essence of their intellectual divergence. Koch was searching for a physical theory of consciousness. Chalmers was convinced that such a theory might never exist, at least not one that answers the deeper why. Despite their differences, Koch doesn't dismiss the contributions of philosophy. In fact, he openly acknowledges that many philosophical insights foreshadowed major scientific developments. Freud, for instance, suggested that much of our mental life happens outside of conscious awareness. His notion of the unconscious while not rooted in modern neuroscience, anticipated our current understanding that vast portions of brain activity never reach conscious awareness, but still shape our emotions and decisions. This divide reflects two traditions: empirical science, which prioritizes data and observation, and rational philosophy, which explores meaning beyond the measurable. Their clash is not a weakness, but a fertile ground for discovery, where opposing views may yield unexpected insights into the mind's inner workings. What separates Koch from philosophers like Freud and Chalmers is his deep reliance on data. For him, consciousness is a biological phenomenon like any other. It must be observable, testable, and reproducible. His mission is to pinpoint the exact structures responsible for generating it, and to prove it with scientific evidence. In many ways, Chalmers and Koch represent two distinct ways of approaching reality. One begins with what is known and attempts to explain the unknown. The other starts from mystery, accepting it as fundamental and irreducible. Together, they have helped elevate the debate on consciousness, pushing both science and philosophy into richer, more nuanced territory. And while their wager may never be judged or resolved, Koch continues to work with urgency, as if the deadline were fast approaching. Because in his view, consciousness doesn't require a miracle to be explained. It only requires light. Consciousness is not evenly spread across the brain. It's not enough for a region to be active. It must also contribute to what we feel. Many areas work tirelessly in the background, completely unnoticed. Others, however, form the very core of our conscious experience. Christof Koch explains that much of what the brain does happens without awareness. Take the frontal cortex, for instance. It handles thinking, language, and planning. It can be highly active, yet its workings may remain entirely outside our conscious mind. In contrast, one particular area seems to switch on our perceptual world: the posterior hot zone. This region includes parts of the parietal, occipital, and temporal cortices. It is deeply involved in vision, hearing, spatial orientation, and body awareness. When these areas are damaged, consciousness can vanish suddenly or become fragmented. When stimulated, they can evoke vivid perceptions, even complex hallucinations. This is the area where our core conscious experience seems to reside. This area acts like a high-frequency hub of awareness, where sensory signals are fused and interpreted in real time. It's not just active, it's necessary. Without this integration center, our internal narrative, the feeling of being present, would simply not emerge. Figure 1 visualizes this distinction through the metaphor of a city at night. Some areas shine brightly. These are the neighborhoods of conscious activity. Others, though still functioning, remain in shadow. Koch and fellow researcher Parvizi use this image to highlight the uneven glow of consciousness across the brain. Attention, like electricity, illuminates only the busy districts of perception. This insight shifts the focus of consciousness research. Instead of searching across the entire brain, neuroscientists can now concentrate on this compact yet powerful zone. It sharpens the search, making the mystery of awareness more tangible. The city metaphor is no accident. Just as industrial zones in a city operate without the direct involvement of its citizens, there are brain structures that sustain life without our knowledge. The cerebellum, brainstem, and parts of the thalamus keep the body running, but they do not contribute to the conscious experience. Koch considers this posterior concentration of experience to be one of modern neuroscience's most significant findings. What we call I, what we see, hear, smell, feel, emerges from a very specific and focused region of the brain. It's not thought that defines consciousness, it's perception. Much like the crowded, intricate scenes painted by Peter Bruegel. Conscious experience is a sensory composition, visual, auditory, tactile, crafted and sustained by precise brain architecture. In the posterior hot zone, this tapestry of awareness is brought to life. Artificial intelligence can defeat chess champions, generate hyper-realistic images, translate languages in seconds, and hold conversations that mimic human style. But does that make it conscious? For Christof Koch, the answer is clear. Simulating a mind is not the same as having one. Consciousness is not just computation or data. It's not a sequence of instructions that can be executed on any platform. Koch offers a powerful analogy. A computational model of the heart can predict blood flow, simulate heartbeats, and anticipate diseases. But it will never pump blood. No matter how accurate, it lacks the capacity to sustain life. The same applies to the brain. Simulating neural processes on a computer doesn't equate to experiencing anything. An artificial network can classify images or recognize faces, but that doesn't mean it feels. It can identify that an image is red, but it won't see the color red. It might detect sadness in a sentence, but won't know what sadness is. Koch insists that consciousness depends on specific physical structures. An organic brain with real neurons, synaptic connections, chemical and electrical flows. It's not enough to replicate outward behavior. The internal conditions that give rise to experience must also be present. This distinction becomes even more significant as AI systems grow increasingly convincing. We are not just dealing with machines that answer questions. We are creating entities that mimic empathy, humor, and memory. Yet behind these performances, there is no subjective spark, no flicker of real awareness. It's theater without an audience, a shadow without substance. And unless we construct machines with the internal architecture needed to produce consciousness, these systems will remain remarkable tools, not feeling minds. The temptation to believe in conscious machines comes from our desire to humanize anything that behaves like us. But acting as if one has consciousness is not the same as possessing it. An AI may imitate emotions, but it does not feel them. It can say, "I'm afraid," without knowing what fear is. The difference lies not in language, but in experience. Koch doesn't rule out artificial consciousness in the future, but says it won't come from software running on conventional computers. Making a machine feel would require building a physical system capable of generating experience, not just functionality. Consciousness isn't perfect animation. It's lived reality. Until machines have that inner spark, they remain simulations, not conscious beings. The difference is subtle, but essential. And so far, no AI has crossed that line. Christof Koch began his quest by trying to locate consciousness within the brain. But the deeper he delved, the more he opened himself to a possibility that would transform his view of reality. What if consciousness is not a byproduct of the brain, but a fundamental property of the universe? This idea, though it may sound mystical, emerges from a concrete scientific framework, the integrated information theory, developed by Giulio Tononi. According to this theory, any system that integrates information in a causal way, producing a whole that is more than the sum of its parts, possesses some degree of consciousness. It's not about thought or intelligence, but about experience. If a system can combine different signals, process them as a whole, and modify itself in response, then it has an internal point of view. A security camera, for instance, may record images, but it has no visual experience. A brain, by contrast, does. This leads Koch to a provocative conclusion. Consciousness doesn't begin with humans. It is a property that arises wherever an architecture exists capable of integrating information in a complex way. An insect, an octopus, a biological neural network, or even, in theory, an artificial structure with the right characteristics, could possess some degree of subjective experience. This shift in perspective has profound implications, not only for neuroscience, but for ethics, technology, and how we relate to the world around us. If consciousness is widespread, even if only in simple forms, then our understanding of life expands dramatically. It challenges long-held assumptions about what deserves moral consideration, what entities might feel pain, or what systems may one day require rights. Koch believes this idea should lead not just to scientific inquiry, but to a more compassionate worldview, one that recognizes experience as more common than we previously imagined. This view echoes ancient ideas, Eastern philosophies that speak of a universal mind, or beliefs that assign a soul to all things. Koch doesn't make this argument from religion, but from physics and biology. Yet he admits that the boundary between science and mysticism can blur when we try to grasp consciousness at its deepest level. What matters is not how intelligent a system is, but how integrated its information becomes. The more integration, the deeper the experience. This doesn't mean the universe as a whole is conscious, but it does suggest that certain structures, when they reach a specific level of complexity, become inner viewpoints within matter. For Koch, this hypothesis is not a departure from science, but an expansion of it. Consciousness may be as fundamental as mass or energy. And if that's true, it doesn't just redefine what we are. It redefines what the universe itself might be. A vibrant network of interwoven experiences. If consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe, then every experience, however small, is an intimate expression of reality sensing itself. We are not external observers. We are conscious expressions within a wider web of existence. Understanding this doesn't just redefine science, it redefines identity. Perhaps the universe doesn't merely contain us. Perhaps in some sense it is dreaming us. And that concludes our video. If you enjoyed the content as much as we did, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your feedback and suggestions for future videos. And don't forget to turn on notifications to stay up to date with all our updates. Thanks for being part of our community. See you in the next video.